estudiante del centro de la Universidad de Harvard University en el Centro de Estudios Europeos. Y el día de hoy él preparó una ponencia que se llama Orient and Occident, the Clash of Two Worlds in the Verge of Populism and Refugee Crisis. Antes de proceder a darle la palabra al doctor, les quiero comentar que él está muy interesado en participar aquí en nuestra facultad y tener un semestre o quizá dos y poder dar algún seminario o alguna otra actividad que por supuesto fortalezca los trabajos aquí en nuestra propia facultad. Él preparó un documento al cual le va a dar lectura. La mecánica va a ser la siguiente. Él va a exponer. Vamos a hacer un par de comentarios. Ustedes tienen también la palabra para todos los que quieran preguntar de manera abierta. Lo pueden hacer en español. Él entiende español. También estuvo en Italia haciendo otro doctorado. Entonces entiende italiano, español, un poco de todo. Él es de origen alemán. Pero la sesión que él va a presentar va a ser en inglés. Entonces, yo le pediría a Carmen, que por favor nos pudiera leer su semblanza curricular, por favor.
Alexander,
a lo mejor está apagado.
Alexander Gorlak is the founder of the debate magazine The European, whose publisher and editor-in-chief he was from 2009 to 2016. He holds a PhD in theology and a PhD in linguistics. In both academic works, Alex deals with the relations of the Muslim and the Western world. He studied in Italy, Egypt, and Turkey for his enterprise. As a journalist, Gorlak worked for German television, serving in the studios of this television outlet in New York and London. Gorlak also wrote for several German national papers, Frankfurter Allgemeine, Zeitung und Die Welt, and Focus prior to founding The European. He served as head of the online edition of the political magazine Cicero. For a period of time, Gorlak worked as a deputy spokesman of the Christian Democratic Union of Bundestag, the German parliament. He was also a scholar of the Adionier Foundation for talented students and later held teaching assignments, among others, at the Freie Universität Berlin. Today, he is a member of the Liberal Party, FDP, in Germany. In 2014, Gorlak became a John F. Kennedy Memorial Fellow at the Center of European Studies at Harvard, while he held a series of lectures on debates in Germany and its influence on Europe. In 2015, he was invited as a visiting scholar at Harvard's Divinity School. Gorlak researches in the field of politics and religion. He is a senior advisor to the Berggruen Institute and the World Post, a distinguished columnist for a weekly paper and an op-ed contributor to the New York Times. In his last book, We Want to See You Fail, Gorlak examines the reasons of mediocrity and malice in German society. During his stay at CES, he will work on his book project on the future of secularism in Europe and the US.
Bueno, entonces le daríamos la palabra al doctor Alexander Gorlak. Please, doctor.
Hello and good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Damaso, for inviting me and having me here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the presentation and the organization of this lecture. One can easily argue that we are living through a phase in history that our descendants will call an age of identity. Not only in the Western world, but also across the globe, societies debate what it may mean to be a part of them. For instance, in India, Hindu nationalists debate about that and deny the Muslim minority in the country their status as Indians. In their argument, India is a Hindu nation. Same holds true for many European countries, such as Poland, where the national narrative elevates the Catholic faith as paramount for Polish identity. The ruling party in the country therefore explicitly unwelcomes refugees of Muslim faith. despite the fact that the Roman pontiff, the head of the Catholic Church, to which allegedly all Poland bows, urged his flock across the old world to take in these refugees as an act of Christian mercy. In the aftermath of 9/11, religion has become the key indicator for identity. But what religion we are talking about? Clearly, it is not about spirituality or charity, what we can see by the Polish example. Religion serves a variety of purposes and has achieved a different set of meanings over the course of human history. The sort of religion that we see at work now, mostly while examining the age of identity, is religion as politics, political religion. There is an interpretation of religion as politics, political religion in every developed faith that makes it not only an instrument of the ruling class or the governing class, but also for the governed. And it has the goal and the purpose to provide a feeling of belonging and to be at the right place at the right time. The governing and the governed alike therefore seek and embrace narratives that support and hold the convictions of the whole res publica in the grace of stability and order. Wherever you have to sort out things for a community that is bigger than a family, basically, you need this sort of order, some type of order. Order in order to collaborate and secure the survival of the group. Order is established by narratives. These narratives indicate who rightfully asserts the means of enforcing the order. Historian Yuval Harari asserts in his book, A Brief History of Mankind, that there are two sorts of narratives that cater to that purpose. It's gossip and mythology. Gossip helps us to relate to people in the wider group that we have never seen and met, but we have some slight idea about. My favorite example is Brangelina, like Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, who got married and then divorced, they have kids and whatever. And you can talk about Brangelina in India and in Mexico and in Germany, and that's what they mean by a narrative through gossip. Mythology is maybe a bit less exciting, but it's more profound and more deep. Religion, on its end, also provides a sort of gossip, a narrative about where we come from and where we go to. And on these narratives, on these two narratives, rests the order that a group, a tribe, a nation established in order to collaborate and to make the whole thing going. And this identity, the narrative creates, while define the political, the economic, this identity, these narratives, they define as much the political sphere as they do culture and as they do influence economy. And this type of religion, this political religion we talked about, is mutual exclusive. Different religious narratives, different claims of legitimacy. Orient, used as a term for the Arab Muslim world, and Occident, used as a term for Christian Western Europe, clearly are different in the narratives that shape their culture. In the age of identity, where gossip may, Brangelina again, cross the borders of cultural belonging and of identity very easily. As I just said, in India and in Mexico, they know about Brangelina. But this is not true for narratives that are rooted in political religion. Since 9/11, the global dimension of these divergent political religions and their claims of legitimacy has become very obvious. It is mostly Christendom, the Occident, and Islam, the Orient, that are portrayed as the main antagonists in this era of distinction. Samuel Huntington, the author of The Clash of Civilizations, rather drastically described the future encounters between those two major religions, those religious communities, as an enterprise of bloodshed. Of course, Huntington, a political theorist that he was, did not have religion as a natural religion or a spiritual force in mind. He was clearly talking about a political Weltanschauung. And the discrepancy of these different Weltanschauungen, in Huntington's opinion, between Islam and Christianity, Islam and the West, to Huntington, inevitably leads to armed conflict. And as a matter of fact, both Christianity and Islam have taken on different roads when it comes to their narratives. They are theologically and politically mutually exclusive. This antagonism roots back in something that one may call the natural religion, and I will be trying to explain that to you. What we face today between the Orient and the Occident has a pattern that Oxford historian Peter Frankopan, in his recently published book, The Silk Roads, A New History of the World, excavates. Religious practice and belief has been intertwined with political dominion and practice of governance. Frankopan sums this behavior by the rulership up, and I quote, "There were strong incentives for rulers to invest in the right spiritual infrastructure, such as the building of lavish places of worship. This offered a lever over internal control, allowing leaders to form a mutual strengthening relationship with the priesthood who, across all the principal religions, wielded substantial moral authority and political power. This did not mean that rulers were passive, responding to doctrines laid out by the independent class. On the contrary, determined rulers could reinforce their authority and dominance by introducing new religious practices." This is exactly what happened in Europe after Emperor Constantine accepted the Christian faith with his baptism in the year 312. Not only he ordered the construction of churches and new religious infrastructure, he and his successors would loudly and decisively interfere in the councils of the early church whenever the bishops, to the emperor's taste, fell short in delivering answers to controversial theological questions. The well-being of the res publica, and we still try to figure out what natural religion is, the well-being of the res publica depended on the benediction of the gods. Behind this rather developed thought of public enterprise in the Roman Empire, however, one finds very deeply rooted, like human, we call it natural religion, which is mostly portrayed in today's language as superstition and stuff like that. It embodies archaic forms of belief, trying to win over the favor of higher spirits and gods. And I again quote Frankopan. "The equation was as simple as it was powerful. A society protected and favored by the right gods, or God, thrived. Those promising false idols and empty promises suffered." To refresh our memory, the baptism of Emperor Constantine followed the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. In a dream, the commander-in-chief saw a sign in the sky interpreted as She and Rho, which were the first letters of the name Christ, of Jesus Christ, the letters symbolizing the name of Jesus. And a celestial voice predicting to the general, "In hoc signo vinces," in this sign you will conquer. This is natural, superstitious, if you want, religion par excellence. It is the root of many things that we today would call political religion. Taking the identity conflict and few notches down from Huntington into our modern era, you see that almost every major country in Europe has taken one step or the other to define what their identity is and what makes, let's say, the Germans German. Religion is hereby a very huge aspect, not the natural religion of Constantine, but the political religion. I give you an example. The concept of German Leitkultur, which means the prevalent culture, operates generously with the idea of the Judeo-Christian heritage that may be the definer of what German culture, moreover, the whole architecture of the West rests upon. This endeavor is, however, clearly not due to the admiration for the indeed rich Jewish culture that Germany once had and Europe once had. In my understanding, it is basically to make the Muslims in the Western diaspora understand that they are not welcome. In many high developed countries, for example in Germany, but also others, where president, chancellor and ministers are sworn into office, they have the optional adamant for this swear to say, "So help me God." Politicians who take the oath of office with the addendum, "So help me God," may utter this for a variety of reasons. However private the religiosity and spirituality of each and every politician may be, the invocation of God in this context, however, is a public act. And this public act, as much as in other public acts, also like a wedding vow in a church or in a city hall, so argues Italian philosopher Vattimo. He says, whenever we do that, when we invoke a God, when we swear, when we promise, we want to have a third party, an independent party, watching over us and give us their benediction. We want to be somehow, to a slight extent, being out of the context of time and space we just are in. And this is a reason Vattimo would explain why religion still is very vital in the political sphere and context. Having said that, it is clear to me that we have to distinguish between the God of the private and the God of the public realm. The God of the public sphere stands for the beliefs and the convictions of the res publica. The God is meant to protect and bless. What I referred earlier to, like to the Western culture or to the Muslim culture. And this is also why many constitutions, to have a last example, in the Western world, have in their preamble a reference to God. It's called an invocatio Dei in Latin, and it is the God of the framework and identity of this political religion. It's not the God you may believe in on a Sunday morning or a Saturday morning or a Friday afternoon. And let us pause a moment, because we have come up with a few definitions about religion that is out there. Let us pause a moment so that we can fill in the other forms of religion other than the natural religion and the political religion. There is, in my opinion, two more. It is the third is called, I would call, the established religion. And the last one, the fourth, to me, is mysticism. An established religion, you may call what we see today in Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism. And this is not to derogate, in my opinion, when I say that, other forms of religion that are still out there, like natural religions. It's, to me, just only a descriptive term. And established religions, they have sacred scripture, they have a doctrine, and they have a pastoral practice. What they offer is a Weltanschauung and also rites of passage, which we know in the Christian framework as baptism, confirmation, the wedding, and the burial. These, as I pointed out earlier, they are mutually exclusive. You are either a Christian or you are Muslim. Mysticism, on the other hand, is totally different from all that I mentioned before. You may read a text by a mystic from Jewish, Muslim, or Christian descent, and you will cover the name of the author. You cannot tell who wrote it, what religion this mystic would have had. It's basically the common share of these mystics is to define the deity or the god or the goddess for whatever, that described by what they are not, to define and to say that you cannot come up with doctrine and established religion to understand the mystery of the divine. Political religion, to be back to the topic after this tiny excursion, embraces ruler and ruled, and also in the modern contemporary context, you have religious narratives that hold societies together. England, for instance, you have in England a strong, long-living narrative of exceptionalism. So England, back in the days, perceived itself as being the successor of the 12 tribes of Israel. So they have also like old songs where they say in the last night of the proms, it's a funny thing they do in England every year. They have one song, it's called Jerusalem, and it ends with the solemn note that oh, if Jerusalem was built in England. And on board of the Mayflower in the year 1620, these ideas of exceptionalism went from the old world to the shores of the new world, which we know today as the United States of America. And also the United States of America have embodied and embraced this sort of language, this political religious language. And I mean, I'm sure you have been listening to several American presidents. And if you remember Ronald Reagan, who wanted to make this exceptionalism revitalize this exceptionalism and speaking about the United States as the city of on the hill, it's basically a biblical term and a biblical picture that he has been using. So now we are at the core why these sort of narratives deriving from political religion are why migrants in this context are seen and perceived as dangerous. They do, in the opinion and the eyes of their adversaries, they destabilize the system because they cannot read the inventory that I just laid out to you. They cannot participate in the language of the Bible or in the language of this political religion, in the language that defines rulership and gives legitimacy. In the European context, just to go back to Emperor Constantine, when the Roman Empire declined and the German kings emerged, Charlemagne, Karl the Great, in order to become the emperor of this new established realm, he went to Rome and got consecrated by the Pope, who was been seen and perceived as the last bulwark of the Roman Empire. So in the idea of the Holy Roman Empire of German nation, the emperors got their authority and their legitimacy through the benediction, and through that they inherited the power of the Roman Caesars. So this goes very, very way back, and not every European could name that. But I'd say, and I would argue, that you see until this very day that people can read this inventory, do understand what it means to talk about the city on the hill, and Muslim immigrants to Europe basically cannot. They do not understand, in the eyes of their opponents, the Occidental framework. So it's all about loyalty that, again, in the eyes of the adversaries, migrants cannot deliver. The ideal behind all these narratives of belonging is to boost the own group, us, like a monolith. And in order to create this, there ought to be the others, them. And that and you have to allege that those pose a threat to the well-being of the own groups. In our time, I'd argue Muslims are in many cases the others. In parts of the Western world, in parts of the Christian world. And as a side note, to illustrate what I mean about this loyalty, back in the days, Emperor Barbarossa, the dude with the red beard, he had, like as a guard, he had Saracen soldiers that would guard him, and they were Muslims. And basically, he did that in case he would have a battle with the Pope, the Roman Pontiff. The Pope would excommunicate the guards of the emperor, and they would just obey because the spiritual force in a Christian framework means something. So having a guard of Muslim faith, this would protect the emperor because they were not loyal to the narrative I was just telling to you. So if you look back into history, you find some of these examples, and Barbarossa, that's quite some 1,000 years ago. So the narratives of natural religion, of political religion, and of established religion are very much intertwined and interwoven. And I think that's the reason why, when I give lectures like this, and this rests on a lot of experience, you realize that people do use, from all the three, a tiny bit when they talk about religion. And this is why it gets messy when we try to examine what is going on in the refugee crisis or in the encounter or confrontation between Islam and the West. When you ask, for instance, the question, are Islam and democracy compatible? That's the question. What do you mean? What Islam you're talking about? It's the same about Christianity. Is it what people believe in their villages when they go to service, to church or to mosque? Or is it what political rulership lays out as a narrative, again, of rulership? And you may be seeing that these interwovenness. It's important that we look deeper into the reasons why this may be, because we all use, when we not reflected, religion as a part of all of that. We may not refer to the mystics about when we talk about religion, but we refer to the natural religion, we refer to political religion, and we also refer to established religion. Let me refer to ethnologist David Graeber. He wrote a book in 2011. It was called Debt, the First 5,000 Years. And he tried to shed light on the connection between moral and economic behavior. And what he would argue, he would say man always finds itself bound in a variety, in a multitude of relationships and dependencies. And these dependencies release in him a sense of being encumbered in debt. One example, so children will always feel indebted to their parents, and they can only make up for that for becoming parents themselves. You cannot just give your parents a check and say, now I make up for you that you gave birth to me and that you raised me and that you paid me like being a student at UNAM and chill around or whatever. No, so you can only make that up through becoming parents yourself. That's what Kramer says. In the bigger context of our existence, he says, okay, well, we realize we just have our life, not we only, but our parents and our grandparents. We are part of a bigger whole, the universe, the cosmos, whatever. And he said that invigorates in us a feeling of also happiness, beatitude, but also like of being indebted to whoever we think is responsible for all that. So, and this is why he said this is when temples came about, and also the economy of religious worship. And I think he makes a good point in putting the finger at the fact that what we perceive as religious acts come from a very natural religious sort of context for empirical feeling that then very quickly translates into established religion that then again comes up with narratives. So if you look into the old temples, like also on this continent, but in many other parts of the world, you see that also, or the famous Temple of Jerusalem, you see that repaying your debt to your eternal master or God is also sort of an economy. And this is why these narratives of religious contexts are intertwined with politics, culture, and religion. Another dude, like his name is Thomas Sedlacek, he wrote a book in also 2011. It's called The Economy of Good and Evil. And he examined another very nice side note, that in many languages, this religious and economical connotation are mixed into one word. So I think it's the same also in Spanish, like the debita, like in the Our Father and the prayer. I don't know how you say that in Spanish, but they are as much the sins as they are the economical debts. So you see that religious inventory is like visible, or you can excavate it in many societal contexts. And I leave that out. I have a quote here by Max Weber, who is with the sociology of religion, wrote like the masterpiece on religion, but I think we're running out of time. But just coming to another point about this us versus them, because this is where all the conflicts of the sorts we discussed today rest upon. In the 70s, the studies of social identity came to a first breakthrough by a dude called Henry Teifel. And he discovered that identity, already in children, is deployed in an us and them routine. So he basically came up with an experiment in which kids were allegedly in a group and they were like playing against another group. The kid wouldn't know the kids of his group, and he would also not know the other kids. But in the end, when it comes to make the moves in the game, he would always prefer the people of his group, of the us. Even the kids do this already. And that was actually the beginning of social identity theory, and with the striking discovery that us versus them is not deployed onto us by the emperor or by the pope. It's something that may be deeply entrenched in us to make ourselves go. And again, back to Harari and the narratives of gossip and mythology, that seems to root back very far. Let me have a last thought on that. And I take this from the religious philosopher René Girard. He also wrote about this and thought and reflected a lot about this us versus them. And he deployed a theory of the scapegoat. The scapegoat we may also be knowing from the Bible. It's just like gets packed all the sins of the people and then sends into the wilderness to die. And the scapegoat, Girard writes about the scapegoat the following. When human groups divide and become fragmented during a period of malaise and conflict, they may come to a point where they are reconciled again at the expense of a victim. Observers nowadays realize without difficulty, unless they belong to the persecuting group, that this victim is not really responsible for what he or she is accused of doing. The accusing group, however, views the victim as guilty by virtue of a contention similar to what we find in scapegoat rituals. The member of the group accused their scapegoat with great fervor and sincerity. More often than not, but that period. So if you look into today's world, you may clearly say when Vladimir Putin in Russia condemns homosexuals, or you look into Turkey where President Erdogan is scapegoating the Kurds, we as non-Russians and non-Turkish, we may easily detect that this is just like a scapegoating procedure. I think I have some more for you, but I guess we are running out of time, so I'm quite excited about your questions. This encounters of today, when we look into as a last note, what I have been telling you has been in the past. So if we frequently asked, what are we going to do about it? And my only hope would be that in a time where you have migration, again, as a global phenomenon, you may find means to overcome this old rhetoric of us versus them, which may be a very difficult and complicated task, as I laid out to you. We have been doing this as human species for quite some few thousand years. So maybe that's something that you guys at this center and in your studies can think about and make as a new generation of influencers and people in charge may come up with. Thank you.
Pues en realidad es un tema muy complejo. Yo recuerdo mis primeros estudios en la universidad cuando había una materia que se llamaba teoría social y tenía un profesor que me decía, bueno, no me decía, decía el grupo, hablar de política y hablar de religión son de los temas más complejos, comprometidos, por supuesto, y pasionales. Pero él lo decía con tanta pasión, con tanto fervor, que parecía que estaba en conexión con Dios mismo. Yo decía, ¿por qué este profesor le imprime tanto acento al hecho de que hablar de estos temas realmente puede ser, en su versión, incluso hasta peligroso? Y un poco el tema de lo que ha tratado hoy el doctor Alexander Gorlach, por supuesto que trata la raíz de cómo se van construyendo estos estados, estas comunidades políticas, fincadas, por supuesto, en una visión cultural, religiosa, y esto trae a la mente muchos cuestionamientos. Yo no voy a hacer uso del micrófono ni a tomarlo para mí, pero solamente algunas cuestiones que me llaman la atención, y ahorita lo abrimos también para ustedes, por supuesto. Cuando se estaba negociando el fallido Tratado de Unión Europea, salió un tema, y era el tema de la religión. En la parte, digamos, en el principio de lo que era esta constitución, ellos hacían un llamado a los valores europeos y hacían un llamado a lo que constituía ser europeo y una cultura europea. Y me recordó un poco esta idea que mencionaba el doctor Alexander Gorlach acerca del Invocatio Dei, en el que hubo esta tentación de incluso en un tratado de la Unión Europea poner que finalmente Europa era una Europa religiosa. Y obviamente cuando decían una Europa religiosa, hubo tentaciones que dijeran con toda claridad cristiana. Y obviamente hubo ahí un gran debate porque surgió una visión plural de decir, no somos netamente cristianos, también podemos ser musulmanes si miramos a lo que es Europa del Este. Y al final se quitó la idea de poner Europa cristiana y simplemente se dejó Europa es una construcción religiosa. Europa tiene valores religiosos. Y esto obviamente se amplió para poder incorporar también en esta lógica ya no este invocatio dei, sino una idea más plural y más tolerante de lo que es la construcción europea. There are so many things that really I would like to ask Alexander. For instance, how hermeneutics goes into interpreting these old papers of the founder fathers about Christianity and how rulers somehow made use of them. So also how Catholic or Christianity becomes involved in politics and society for their own good, of course, for their own interest, and how this made during the centuries a kind of European culture, a kind of European religion, a kind of European shield, even a shield against what means the other, facing the other. Bueno, yo me gustaría abrir el micrófono. Por supuesto, si gustan hacer algún comentario o pregunta o lo que ustedes tengan como ideas. Por favor.
Answer you?
No. Let's wait a little bit, so then you may answer me. ¿Nadie? ¿Todo quedó perfecto? Otro comentario en lo que lo piensan. Por favor, si gustas levantarte. Sí se escucha.
Very great question. I used like examples from Christianity, but all established religions face this difficulty or this challenge in combining secular matters and spiritual matters. So Christianity, for instance, was like, until it became the dominant religion in the Roman Empire, had no use for a theory of war, for instance, because Christians would not serve in the military, so they were all pacifists. And in the moment they would ascend into power, St. Augustine had to come up with this writing to understand how to now being in charge, because you have to defend yourself. And then a political theory of Christianity emerged, which was totally different from the first 3 centuries where Christianity was persecuted. In Islam, you have as it is an established religion, you have the same but similar sort of context that Islam emerged from the Arab Peninsula very quickly, and it became a political movement rather quickly, more quicker than Christianity became. And so the spiritual matters of the faithful and of the flock and the political ideas that may derive from them, that has been fueled Muslim culture for 1500 years. And today you see in the Muslim world a battle over this, over the interpretation of what politics and Islam mean. You have to see one thing, like when we speak in the Westerners, and Latin America to me is a part of that, when we speak about modernity, we speak mostly about positive things like democracy, human rights, the separation of powers, and in a state, independent judiciary and all that. In the Arab Muslim world, modernity begins with the invasion of Napoleon in Egypt, which was in 1798, and the idea of modernity is always something to defend yourself from the West. But also, it's not just only because the West is bad, it's also because the political theory in Islam until that very day was like summed up in one phrase: Islam rules and it's never been dominated. So then Muslim theology had the challenge to live with the fact that non-Muslims were the most powerful people on the planet, which is a problem in Muslim self-understanding until this very day. So you have a complexity of narratives that grow over history. And in this point, you talk about security, which is absolutely legitimate to talk about. But you see from Nigeria in the Muslim world until Pakistan, the whole Muslim world in that sense is in an upheaval, because the confrontation with modernity has not gone away. It's gotten even more complicated. And now a Muslim in Nigeria knows how a Muslim in Malaysia lives. And that gives a lot of pressure also on the Muslim community themselves. And the most victims of Islamic terrorism are Muslims themselves. So just to put that into perspective, so that I that I just want to highlight the, as much as we debate what is the right dealing with this issue, also the Muslim world has that, and globalization and digitalization has made the problem even more complex. And if I may answer to what is that an answer, or you can ask again if you want to? Yeah, okay, good. But thank you for your question. So, but what he's brought up, what Damaso brought up, is an awesome example for what I meant. I left out the quote by Max Weber. I should have used it because he says something basically about law, that if religion starts to become political, they come also up with laws and lawmaking, and you believe that the source of the lawmaking is God or the gods or whatever is your highest entity in this natural religious context. And in the modern era, for the first time in the West, after a century of religious wars and confrontations, law was perceived as the source of law, which has, I mean, I could go very deep into that now, but basically, the secular state of the modern era doesn't need the blessing of a god to make a just political order. There is, however, there are countries, Germany as well, who has in the preamble of the constitution a reference to God. And again, I think that is the political God. It's not the God we worship on Sunday morning. It's just like this framework of political history. And in the European context, then they were quite keen on saying, no, we don't have the Invocatio Dei, because we are a secular sort of, but then they were like debating about having one passage that refers to the heritage of Europe, which also didn't make it in the end into, I mean, the whole thing died, but also actually mostly because of this God thing, which is quite interesting, that in the beginning of the 21st century, you do not get a European constitution done because you cannot be like of one opinion about God. So in the historic context, of course, Christianity is one of the main roots of Western civilization, but that doesn't mean you all have to go to church on Sunday. And I think this is one of the big distinctions. And also today, one of the pre-last German president, Christian Wolff, he said in a speech, Islam belongs to Germany. And it was an outrage. It was one of his bravest phrases. Again, it was the year 2014. So what? But people would feel like that's not true historically. But what he meant was that the Muslims who now live in Europe or live in Germany, they are part of our societies. So it was a huge debate about this, if Islam really belongs to Germany.
¿Alguna otra pregunta o comentario? Por favor.
I would like the context of characteristics.
I think a lot of confusion comes from what I tried to say about we use the term religion in a variety of ways. Just to say that Germany or Europe has a Christian heritage doesn't make it a Christian continent today. So, but the problem about it is that these narratives are very subtle, and that they belong to the natural sort of religious framework, which people may or may not answer to, because it's very, if it attracts your fear. So like, let's say the gods in the antiquities, like thunder, storm, whatever, you would be afraid, you would bring a sacrifice to hope that the storm goes away, whatever. It's a very deeply entrenched human feeling. So I'd say you saw that in the Brexit vote, for instance, that the politicians in question catered to the fears of the people. You also had that in Germany about the refugees that came in from Syria. And the point is, having 1 million refugees poses a lot of questions, without doubt. But having like fear being like the underlying motive of answering these questions, in my opinion, does not work. So you see the rise of Donald Trump in the United States is explained with the same sort of. He was, I mean, remember what he said in his inauguration? It was just a disgrace about like how he like portrayed the country as a bad place. And I think that's the answer. You have maybe a nation or people at a certain point in time that may answer more to this rhetoric of fear than others. And I'm, as a German, and the engine of the European Union is Germany and France, I'm very pleased and happy and glad about the result of the election. But you also have to say one note. You see, maybe the Anglo-Saxonian narrative is in peril at this point. I'm not an expert on that, but you see clearly that England and the United States have seen like hardship last year in these two elections. So maybe continental Europe has bows to more different. We have no religious distinctive narratives anymore. The Germans, of course not, and also like it's not prevalent in Europe, in Western Europe. To my Eastern Europe, like Hungary and Poland and Slovenia are different, but Western Europe has lost like this religious sort of exceptionalistic touch a long time ago.
Bien, ¿alguien más quiere hacer algún comentario o pregunta? Por favor.
Can you say the first part of the question? It was too.
Yeah, nowadays immigration.
Very good question. The debate about the German Leitkultur is like the prevalent culture of a country, and the European Union has exactly been designed to abolish this sort of national prerogative. Let's say the bottom line of the European Union was never again, after 2 world wars and the Shoah, it was like the distinct wish and expressed goal of the founding fathers of the European Union to overcome nationalism as the main source of war and conflict. Often, like, nations in Europe had their own narratives related to one or the other Christian denomination. So let's say Sweden is Protestant and England is Anglican and Italy is Catholic. But yet the national narratives, who all more or less, except for actually England, came about in the 19th century, in the time where Germany as a nation was founded, Italy as a nation was founded. You would argue that these national narratives are all artificial. Because somebody in Bavaria in German knows precisely what it means to be Bavarian, and somebody in Hamburg Hamburger knows precisely what it means. In Spain, somebody in Catalonia knows exactly what it means to be Catalonian, and somebody in the Basque country knows it as well. But what is a United Kingdom, and what is the Republic of Germany? This always, I mean, there is something that combines people, right? That it connects people. Many, they say, like the language. Okay, without Martin Luther translating the Bible into German, we wouldn't have one lingua alta in Alemán. And it's the same in English, I guess, without the King James Bible. In Italy, Dante is still the national poet, and his Inferno, the language that is in there, Italians still, until this very day, understand, even though the North and the South are very different. So there is something that creates a framework amongst people, and that caters to an idea of a nation. But I would say the nation state has failed to give like answers that make a peaceful life with your neighbors possible. And a national narrative, in my opinion, is always exclusive to other nations. Whereas regional identities, as I just said, Bavaria or Catalonia, or people live on that soil, and so they live where their identity is, and they can understand that other people who live in other places may also like the place they live in very much. Europe is the only narrative that I know that could be inclusive and for such a variety, for such a big amount of people, because Europe always caters the idea of we are diverse. There's many of us. Also, like there is a common identity. In Germany, you know Don Quixote, you also know Robin Hood, and we have cultural exchanges. We may also have like historically the same religion, but Europe, to me, answers a question that nationalists or national narratives could not answer: how to be someone without derogating the others. And this is why we saw like these right wings. They come. What we have now, Europe is so strong enough that like you hear some tiny tones about the Germans and the English and the French, whatever. But there is no, after 70 years, it's not strong enough to send like the French to war with the Germans or the Germans to war with the English. This is why the Polish, like in England, were like ostracized. But I think this is why our enemy, the other today, is not anymore in Europe. It's just like the invaders from the Muslim world, like invaders are like this because it's recorded. It's just like a quote. And so the other is now not anymore in Europe, but it's outside Europe. Well, I try to explain it, that I think when you say that and you have a repulsive thing, I think a reaction, I think it's also, yeah, because religion is not important in my life and it's also not important in the life of many, as in going to church and having prayers and observing the holidays and whatever. To me, it's like it's important to lay out that religion has many, many layers, which has nothing to do what you believe in. It's the narratives that are created on the grounds of religion and the cultures that derive from religion. And I'd also say there's no such thing as the natura humana in a philosophical sense. We are all different, but also we still are the same species. So I guess this natural inclination to be superstitious. There's superstition, I guess, in Latin America as much as there's in China when it comes to the afterlife or to the saints who do whatever in our favors. It's embodied. It's still this natural religion, and this political religion is also all over the place, I'd say. But people would not necessarily call it religion. In the European context, you have this debate about, again, is Islam and democracy, do they work? So they do not talk about are praying people in a mosque combinable with a parliament. It's not what they mean. It's about, does Islam as a religion, as a political theory, cater to the ideals of democracy? And that's the same, by the way, for Christianity in the 19th century. It's been a big question about whether or not democracy, I mean, the Catholic Church, in the First Vatican Council, a priest had to do an oath against the achievements of modernity, that they would not cater for liberalism, that they would not encourage the flock to go to elections and stuff. So also Christianity and Catholicism had difficulties with the achievements of modernity, and we just are past that in many parts, at least of Western Europe. Monsignor, there.
I think so.
You make it. You do it.
All right, please.
Yeah, I think that's what sociologists tell us, that aging societies have another outlook on the future than young societies. And again, this is you could say it's also very archaic, but in the European context, it's like, okay, the Arab nations, they are all young, they are come over, they overrun us, they take our girls and they make our churches into mosques, and then we all gonna be Muslim. Well, that's the outlook that you have if you are an aging population. I always keep on saying, well, look, I mean, look into Latin America, look into the United States even. These are more striving and younger societies. So if you are afraid of like the Muslims coming over, why don't you invite plenty of people from Latin America to just come for a while and stay with us? It's the same cultural context, whatever. But again, I'm not sure if it's only about religion in that sense. It's a very archaic feeling of that you get overrun by the young. Is that the answer to your question? You can go on and ask me again if I'm not precise. I'd say what I know about the American and the election and the Brexit referendum, that if only the so-called millennial generation would have gone to vote, Hillary Clinton would have won with 98%, and Brexit would never have happened. So I would think that the younger generation may be more open to the achievements of globalization and digitalization. You all need that. I'm sure while I was giving this lecture, you were all Snapchatting and whatever you did while I was like working my ass off for you. But anyway, so that's something where I'd say like this younger generation is much more inclined, and this feeling that we may have is, at least when it comes to the American election and the Brexit referendum, seems to be true, like seems to be provable or plausible.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Europe doesn't have an immigration policy. That's its biggest problem. They had like Dublin, the Dublin Treaty, Dublin 1 and 2, and so when the refugees came from the Mediterranean through Italy, for instance, so Germans would say, oh, whatever, and Swedes would say whatever. So, but there was the idea of then distributing the refugees in all European Union member states. This never really panned out, and I'm not sure why that is. Then the refugee crisis came along. Then Germany took in this 1 million. Now we know, we had a dear colleague of mine, he came up with a book, The Chased, he called it, and he described how the refugee crisis in 2015 hit the German government more or less unexpectedly, and so that they actually decided in the first place to close the border and let no one in. So, or not no one, but then stop like after 2 weeks or something. And this may be causing a lot of turmoil in this year because we have federal election, and like Angela Merkel, who was responsible for that, she was very heavily criticized for that, but she could stand ground by saying it's our humanist, our Christian, our European values. But now it turned out actually they wanted to close the border themselves, and it didn't fall through because they didn't dare. So you see, in this whole endeavor of refugee policy, the whole European Union now at this point doesn't have any. So I'd argue, you either say we don't let anybody in, and then the European public also has to live with the images of drowning boats, or you just say we let people in, but then you have to organize and to make it like Germany, for instance, has not even an immigration law, because the German conservatives say, oh, we are not an immigration country, period. We have in the cities, we have 20% of people not of German descent. How can you say this is not an immigrant nation? It's crazy.
¿Alguien más desea hacer alguna pregunta, por favor?
Well, I guess nowadays we see it quite precisely about Islam and the West, or Christianity. But there's this one example when the Second World War was over and the Red Army came from the east and took some of the part that used to be part of the German Reich. The Germans fled, and they fled to the core, to the motherland, to the heartland, so to speak. And they were the same skin color, the same language, the same religion. But Germans in central Germany would call them Polacks. Polish, because they didn't want to have their own kin living next to them. So there was like, it was I think 4 million, I'm not sure, but it was in the millions, people who got like displaced after the war. So you have this unacceptance, or this us versus them, like in all sorts of in all types, not only between Islam and Christianity. You don't have it only in our days. You also had it like over the course of history. So I'm, if I understood your question correctly, I would always argue that this is nothing specific about Christianity or Islam. It just happens to be in our days that it's like that it is between those major players. Did I understand your question? Say it, then rephrase it, please. Why some refugees are excluded? I mean that's what I try to say. It's like they are not from us. Okay, here's the thing. Like when you in the antiquities, like you had tribes fighting each other. So you would then displace people, take their names away and make them their slaves. So what it meant to be a slave was basically like you had no name, you had no kin, no relatives, no social like network, no belonging. So and that made you like a nobody. So that's also what happened in the Third Reich with the Jews. They just get like they were called like Israel and Rachel. They just all got one name. So and then they got like also the numbers like tattooed. So you have means by which you express to people that they do not belong. So, and if I would move to Mexico, you're all very nice to me and you like me, and I'm also not a refugee, I'm an expat. That's something different. It's totally the same thing, but you have other names for people who have studied and go abroad, and I was at Harvard, now I go to Mexico, but would also be like at least a migrant, and I would have no context. And if you would come to my country, you would also not have a context. But now there is like millions coming, and that is something that triggers the fear of people, and also like the question about the loyalty of them. But yeah, so that's what I would answer you.
¿Alguien más quiere hacer alguna pregunta, algún comentario? Ok, nada más. Perdón, compañero, sí, por favor.
No, I mean, Turkey had all the potential to add to the political religious discourse in Islam a new chapter by being like a secular republic, which is a democracy with independent judges and a parliament and all that. They were like they were for 70 years on that road with a lot of bumps and whatever. So I think this is why the European Union, despite many difficulties, opened like the negotiations for full membership, because as Europeans, I mean, we were Christians and we still are Christians and whatever, but democracy and the values of our constitutions, they have a value in itself. You do not have to be a Christian to believe in human rights. It may help, then it's good, but it's like it's enshrined in the constitution. And Turkey had a chance to become the first Muslim republic, or a republic with a majority of Muslim inhabitants that would join into that modern sort of narrative of secular republics. Because a secular republic does not mean that the people living there do not have a religion. That is not what it means. It means that the framework by which your rights as citizens are guaranteed are not dependent on some supernatural being that nobody of us has ever seen.
Bien, ¿alguien más desea hacer algún comentario, alguna pregunta? ¿no?
So, and then if not, then I also do like social media. So I would like to do a selfie with all of you, and maybe you can just come in the middle, so that and you can wave or do.
No, but we haven't finished yet.
Oh, I thought you want to.
No. You may make your selfish, and then we come all together to take a photograph.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking about all the question and answers you have been giving, and thinking about not this Europe of Christianity, but this Europe of Christian heritage and this secular state. However, when we construct this narrative, for instance, Huntington, which talks about a clash, and he somehow putting a confrontation between religion, and that's part of the narrative. And the problem in Europe may be that we don't have other narrative than those that comes from Christianity. And a lot of the values, humanities, human rights, democracy, a lot of values in Europe, of course, they have their roots on Christianity itself, political games, of course. So how is that possible to construct an alternative narrative or a merge of narrative or an inclusion of narratives in order to also, of course, take these people into a new European narrative?
Sure. I mean, I referred to this Italian philosopher, Giano Vattimo, and he made an interesting argument. He said Christianity and secularization in the Christian world is already implemented within the Christian framework. He said, that's what he alleged. He's Italian, he's, I guess, agnostic, but somehow a bit Catholic still, so whatever. But he said, like, the essence of Christianity is that God becomes man, and therefore, like, all these natural religious sort of superstitious circumstances should actually have vanished. So he would say secularization is something which is deeply Christian because it takes away all the superstitions. So having said that, you have a possibility to include like a secular Christianity into a European narrative, but I have to point to the fact that in the political discourse in Europe, it's never really exclusively Christian. We also emphasize the Greek heritage, the Roman law, the achievements of humanism and enlightenment. You also would refer to the parliamentary systems that emerged in the 19th century. You would refer to Europe and the human rights. So there is nobody in Europe who would say, oh, we are exclusively Christian and nothing else. So I guess this narrative that we have in modern Europe is Christianity is one of them, but not exclusively. And I would always argue that this is why I'm such a fan of this European identity, because it's inclusive. So when we create that, and we created that with some success in Europe, because like my grandfather and my great-grandfather, they fought in wars with France. Like for the last 70 years, we didn't have any war with France. And quite frankly, we may never have any more, because that's quite an achievement. So maybe we come up with narratives for other regions of the world that I find it very compelling and striking. I'm not an expert in Latin American politics, but I found it striking that you managed to just keep out nuclear bombs from this continent with a joint effort. And that's also something that could also be part, I don't know if it's already, but part of a pan-Latin American narrative, for instance. So you can come up with narratives that abolish or that do not take religious heritage too much in account. However, you should not be blinded. It's not religion that's the problem in that sense. It's rooting much more deeper in our human nature to scapegoat others and to define our narratives by us versus them.
Okay. Pues bueno, agradecemos al doctor Alexander Gorlach, y bueno, creo que sí quiere su selfie, ¿no? Quien quiera acercarse, pues está muy bien. No, vamos a tomar un minuto, solo se van a concentrar.
Sí, claro,
no, para...
Gracias.
Okay.
Let's do that. Maybe like this. Yeah, awesome. Gracias.